The classroom fell silent as Professor Velk's mandibles clicked together nervously. The insectoid instructor stood at the front of the lecture hall, his compound eyes scanning the rows of students from a dozen different worlds. Today's lesson was supposed to be straightforward, a basic survival protocol that every species in the galactic community learned in their first year at the academy. When you encounter an apex predator, Professor Velk said, his translator rendering his clicks and chirps into standard galactic, you must follow the 3 steps: freeze, assess your surroundings, then flee to elevated ground. This protocol has saved countless lives across the galaxy. Jake Morrison sat near the back, his notebook open but mostly empty. The young human had been at the academy for 3 months now, and most of the survival classes felt odd to him. Not wrong exactly, just incomplete. He glanced at Kira Wells, the only other human in the class, and saw her frowning at her datapad. Professor Velk continued his lecture, displaying a hologram of a large, wolf-like creature with 6 legs and crystalline spines along its back. This is the apex predator of Zenthar Prime, my homeworld. For millions of years, my ancestors lived in fear of the spine hunter. We learned to freeze when we sensed them, to climb the tall crystal formations where they could not follow. A student named Tarn, whose species resembled an upright deer with blue fur, raised a slender hand. Professor, what if there is no elevated ground? Then you must find cover and remain absolutely still, Velk replied. The predator's vision is based on movement. This is true of all apex predators across the galaxy. Jake's hand went up before he could stop himself. Professor Velk's antennae twitched in his direction. Yes, Jake Morrison? Which kind? Jake asked. The classroom went quiet. Several students turned to look at the human with confusion in their various eyes, stalks, and sensory organs. I don't understand your question, Professor Velk said slowly. Jake sat up straighter, realizing he might have said something wrong. Which kind of apex predator are we talking about? Because the strategy would be different depending on what type you're facing. Professor Velk's mandibles clicked rapidly. A sign Kira had learned meant the professor was agitated. There is only one protocol because there is only one type of apex predator. The dominant hunter of an ecosystem. Right, but Jake hesitated, then continued. Dominant hunters use different strategies. Are we talking about an ambush predator that waits for prey? A pack hunter that coordinates attacks? A pursuit predator that chases over long distances? An aerial predator? An aquatic one? Because you do completely different things for each type. The classroom erupted in confused chatter. Tarn's ears flattened against his head. Multiple types. How many apex predators does Earth have? Kira leaned forward, seeing where this was going. Depends on the ecosystem. In Africa alone, you've got lions, leopards, cheetahs, crocodiles, hyenas, eagles, pythons. Stop, Professor Velk said, his voice strained. You're describing impossible conditions. No world can support multiple apex predators in the same region. They would compete until only one remained. Jake shook his head. But they hunt different things, or hunt the same things in different ways. Lions are pack hunters that work together. Leopards are solo ambush predators that drag their kills into trees. Cheetahs are pursuit predators built for speed. They all lived in the same areas where humans evolved. A mantoid student named Kresh, who came from a species of carnivores, clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. Your species evolved surrounded by multiple apex predators? How did you survive to develop intelligence? We learned different strategies for different threats, Kira explained. If you see a bear, sometimes you make yourself look big and make noise. If it's a grizzly, you play dead if it attacks. If it's a black bear, you fight back. If you see a mountain lion, you never run because that triggers their chase instinct. But if you see a charging elephant, you absolutely run and try to get behind a tree. Professor Velk had gone very still, his compound eyes fixed on the humans. You had to learn multiple survival protocols as children? Sure, Jake said with a shrug. I grew up in Alaska. We had to know about grizzly bears, black bears, moose, wolves, wolverines, and even orcas near the coast. My dad taught me what to do for each one before I was 10 years old. Tarn's voice was barely a whisper. Your world had no safe zones? Jake thought about it. I mean, cities were pretty safe. But even then, you'd occasionally get a bear or a pack of coyotes wandering through. And in the oceans, there are great white sharks. Tiger sharks, bull sharks, orcas, saltwater crocodiles. He trailed off when he saw the horrified expressions around the room. Professor Velk slowly approached Jake's desk. Let me understand this correctly. Humans were not the apex predator of Earth? Not for most of our evolution, no, Jake admitted. We were somewhere in the middle of the food chain. We were prey for a lot of things, but we also hunted smaller animals. That's probably why we developed intelligence and tools. We needed them to survive. The professor's antennae drooped. Humans developed civilization while actively being hunted. Kira pulled up her datapad and projected an image into the center of the room. It showed a human skeleton, the bones scarred with what were clearly bite marks. This is one of our ancestors from about 2 million years ago. Those marks are from a leopard. We found the body in a tree where the leopard had stashed it to eat later. Several students made distressed sounds. One of them, a small furry creature from a herbivore species, actually fainted and had to be caught by a classmate. This is why your survival protocols felt strange to me, Jake said, trying to be helpful. They're based on dealing with one type of threat. On Earth, what works for one predator might get you killed by another. You have to assess what you're facing first. Professor Velk returned to the front of the class on unsteady legs. His voice was quiet when he spoke. Class dismissed. I need to review the curriculum. He looked at Jake and Kira. You two, please come to my office. I have many questions. As the other students filed out in shocked silence, Jake heard Tarn whisper to Kresh. No wonder humans seemed so fearless. They come from a nightmare world. Kresh's response was thoughtful. Or perhaps they simply come from a real world and the rest of us have been sheltered. Jake gathered his things and exchanged a look with Kira. They hadn't meant to cause such a disturbance. They'd just answered a simple question. How were they supposed to know that the rest of the galaxy had evolved on what amounted to easy mode? As they walked toward Professor Velk's office, Jake couldn't shake a strange feeling. If the other species thought Earth was dangerous, what did that mean for humanity's place in the galactic community? Were they going to be seen as some kind of threat? He pushed the thought aside. Right now, he just needed to help his professor understand that survival wasn't one size fits all. It was a skill you adapted based on the situation, the environment, and most importantly, the threat you were facing. On Earth, that had always been the first question. Which kind? The meeting in Professor Velk's office had lasted 3 hours. By the end of it, the professor had sent an urgent message to the Academy Council requesting a full review of Earth's biosphere data. Within 2 days, the council had assembled an investigation committee, and Jake found himself at the center of a galactic incident he never intended to cause. The hearing room was circular, with council members from 15 different species arranged in a semicircle. Jake and Kira sat at a small table in the center, flanked by Dean Horvath, a human administrator who kept shooting them nervous looks, and Lisa Hayes, the human cultural liaison who seemed far more amused than concerned. Council member Shrix, an avian creature with brilliant blue and gold feathers, called the session to order. Her translator rendered her chirps and whistles into precise galactic standard. We are here to investigate claims made by human student Jake Morrison regarding the predator density of Earth. These claims, if true, have significant implications for our understanding of human capabilities and the adequacy of our current survival training protocols. Dean Horvath leaned forward. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. Young Jake here probably exaggerated for effect. You know how students can be. Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment, but before he could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. Actually, if anything, he undersold it. Everyone turned to see Dr. Peter Grant walking into the chamber. The zoologist was in his 60s with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in the field. He'd been brought in from Earth as an expert witness. Dr. Grant, Shrix said, her head feathers rising with interest. Please enlighten us. Peter activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room. Images of Earth's creatures appeared one after another. Lions with their golden manes, tigers striped and powerful, massive brown bears standing upright, crocodiles with jaws full of teeth, sharks cutting through blue water, wolves with ice-cold eyes, eagles diving from the sky. These are just a few examples from various ecosystems, Peter said calmly. Earth supports an unusually high diversity of apex predators. This is due to our planet's varied climate zones, geographical barriers, and complex evolutionary history. A council member resembling a large purple salamander raised a webbed hand. But surely these creatures occupied different regions. They didn't coexist? Many did coexist, Peter replied. He changed the display to show a map of Africa. In the savannas where early humans evolved, Our ancestors shared territory with lions, leopards, cheetahs, hyenas, wild dogs, crocodiles, hippos, and various eagles and pythons. All of these species hunted in the same general area. Impossible, another council member breathed. The competition for resources would be managed through specialization, Peter interrupted gently. Each predator filled a different niche. Some hunted at night, others during the day. Some took large prey, others preferred smaller animals. Some hunted in packs, others alone. The diversity was stable because each species had its own strategy. Kira raised her hand and was recognized. Could I add something? At Shrix's nod, Kira stood and pulled up her own data. Humans aren't just prey that survived. We became predators too. Our ancestors developed persistence hunting, where we would chase an animal for hours in the heat until it collapsed from exhaustion. We're not as fast as a cheetah or as strong as a lion, but we have better endurance than almost any other land animal. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. You were both prey and predator? Shrix asked quietly. Still are, Jake said. People still get killed by animals every year. Sharks attack surfers. Bears attack campers. Crocodiles take people near rivers in some countries. But we also hunt. We're right in the middle of the food chain, which means we had to be smart about everything. A council member that looked like a floating jellyfish pulsed with bioluminescent concern. This seems unnecessarily harsh. Most civilized worlds evolved past such dangers millions of years ago. Lisa Hayes finally spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of experience. That's exactly the problem we're identifying. Most species in the galactic community evolved on what humans would call garden worlds. Minimal predation pressure, stable climates, abundant resources. Your ancestors had the luxury of developing intelligence in relative safety. And that's bad? Dean Horvath asked, still trying to downplay the situation. It's not bad, it's just different, Lisa continued. But it means your survival protocols are based on limited threat models. Professor Velk's class teaches one strategy for one type of threat. On Earth, that kind of rigid thinking gets you killed. Peter pulled up footage that made several council members recoil. It showed a human researcher being charged by a massive elephant. At the last second, the human dodged behind a tree. The elephant crashed past, unable to turn quickly enough in the dense forest. Wrong move for a lion, Peter narrated calmly. Lions can maneuver around trees, but elephants can't pivot well, so you use obstacles. Different predator, different strategy. Another video showed a human playing dead while a large bear sniffed at them. The bear eventually wandered away. That's a grizzly bear, Peter explained. Playing dead works because grizzlies often attack when they feel threatened, not because they want to eat you. But if that were a black bear or a polar bear, playing dead would be fatal. You have to fight back against a black bear and you have to run and find shelter from a polar bear, though running from a polar bear is essentially futile. How do you remember all these rules? The salamander-like council member asked, genuinely confused. Jake shrugged. You just learn them as a kid. Like learning math or language. If you live somewhere with dangerous animals your parents teach you, it becomes automatic. Humans train their children for combat with apex predators. Shrix's feathers were fully raised now, a sign of alarm. Not combat exactly, Kira said carefully. More like situational awareness and appropriate response. We teach children to recognize dangers and react correctly. It's just basic safety. Peter closed his presentation. The point is this. Human survival instincts are calibrated for a high-threat environment with multiple predator types. We assess, adapt, and respond based on specific circumstances. The universal protocols taught here at the Academy would fail on Earth because they assume one type of threat with one appropriate response. The council members exchanged looks that Jake couldn't quite interpret. Finally, Shrix spoke. This explains a great deal about human behavior that we found unusual. Your military volunteers who showed no fear during the Kestrel Station emergency. Your traders who venture into regions others consider too dangerous. Your explorers who request assignments on hostile worlds. She paused. You're comfortable with danger because you never evolved without it. We respect danger, Lisa corrected gently. We're not fearless. But we are adaptable. We know that most threats can be managed with the right knowledge and response. Dean Horvath cleared his throat. So what does this mean for the Academy? For the humans enrolled here? Shrix stood, her full height impressive and slightly intimidating. It means we have much to reconsider, not just about humans, but about our own protocols. If our survival training is inadequate for Earth's environment, What else might it be inadequate for? The hearing was adjourned, but as Jake and Kira left the chamber, Jake heard one council member whisper to another, "Maybe we should be learning from them instead of teaching them." Jake caught Kira's eye. She smiled slightly. Neither of them had wanted to make waves, but maybe, just maybe, those waves would lead somewhere good. The transport shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Karath 4, and Jake pressed his face against the window to get a better look at the training world below. Dense jungle stretched to the horizon, broken occasionally by clearings and winding rivers. It looked beautiful and peaceful, nothing like the dangerous environment the Academy insisted it was. "It's too quiet," Amy Foster muttered from the seat beside him. Jake glanced at the former park ranger. Amy had been brought in from Earth specifically for this demonstration, along with Danny Rogers, a marine biologist who was currently reviewing data on his tablet. The 4 humans were supposed to prove whether Earth's survival methods actually worked better than standard galactic protocols. Kira leaned across the aisle. "Professor Velk looks terrified." She was right. The insectoid professor sat rigid in his seat, surrounded by 10 alien students who'd volunteered to observe the exercise. Behind them sat Commander Irix, a military officer whose species resembled an armored turtle. His job was to oversee the test and extract everyone if things went wrong. The shuttle landed in a designated clearing, and the rear hatch opened. Immediately, Jake's senses sharpened. The air was humid and filled with the sounds of creatures moving through the jungle. Bird-like calls echoed from the trees. Something large splashed in a nearby river. Commander Irix stood at the front of the group. The apex predator of Karath 4 is called the Ravager. It's a pack-hunting reptilian creature, roughly 3 meters long with excellent senses and high intelligence. Standard protocol is to avoid detection and reach elevated positions if encountered. You will have 4 hours to demonstrate your methods. Emergency beacons will extract you if needed. The alien students were given their equipment, a scanner, a beacon, and basic rations. They immediately began looking for trees to climb. Amy watched them and shook her head. That's their whole plan? Just hide up in a tree? It's worked for their species for millions of years, Kira said diplomatically. On their world, maybe, Danny replied, kneeling to examine the soil near the river. But check this out. He pointed to tracks in the mud. 3-toed prints, each as large as a dinner plate, leading into the jungle. Jake crouched beside him. Fresh, maybe an hour old. Single Ravager, moving slowly. He looked up at the trees the alien students were climbing. Those branches wouldn't hold something that size, but they're probably strong enough for the Ravagers to climb if they wanted to. Professor Velk had approached with his scanner. How can you tell it's a single creature and not a pack? Gait pattern, Amy said, joining them. See how the prints are evenly spaced? It was walking, not running. A pack on the hunt moves faster and spreads out. This one is probably doing a territorial patrol. Danny moved along the riverbank, examining the vegetation. They marked territory. See these scratch marks on the tree bark? And the way the undergrowth is trampled here? This is a boundary marker. Within an hour, the humans had mapped the Ravagers' territorial boundaries, identified their most likely hunting paths, and found several areas that seemed to be neutral zones where the creatures didn't patrol regularly. This doesn't make sense, one of the alien students called down from their tree. You're tracking the predators? You should be hiding. Kira looked up at them. We can't hide for 4 hours without knowing where the predators are. That's just waiting to be surprised. We're gathering information so we can make decisions. Amy had found a rocky outcropping that backed up against a cliff face. This would be a good camp position. Water access from the river, clear sight lines, and our backs are protected. Nothing can sneak up from behind. Camp? Professor Velk's antennae twitched rapidly. You're making a camp? Well, yeah, Jake said, already gathering stones to make a fire ring. We can't just stand around for 4 hours. Might as well be comfortable and safe. Danny used local materials to create a simple filter for river water. Amy constructed a perimeter using rocks and sticks that would make noise if disturbed. Jake got a small fire started, not for warmth, but because fire was a universal deterrent to predators. The alien observers watched in stunned silence as the humans transformed a dangerous wilderness into something resembling a base camp. 2 hours into the exercise, the sensors picked up movement. A pack of 5 Ravagers was approaching the clearing where the shuttle had landed. The creatures were magnificent and terrifying, with scales that shimmered green and gold, powerful legs built for running. and mouths full of curved teeth. The alien students froze in their trees, following protocol. The humans did something completely different. Amy picked up 2 rocks and started banging them together, creating a loud, irregular noise. Danny lit a torch from the fire and waved it. Jake shouted, his voice carrying across the clearing. Kira activated a high-pitched alarm on her equipment. The Ravagers stopped, confused by the commotion. They circled warily, clearly intelligent enough to be uncertain about this strange situation. "What are you doing?" Commander Erix demanded, reaching for the emergency extraction button. "Establishing boundaries," Amy called back calmly, still making noise. "We're showing them we're not prey and we're not leaving. They can choose to test us or move on." The largest Ravager took a step forward. Immediately, all 4 humans intensified their display. Jake threw a burning branch that landed between them and the pack. The flames danced and crackled. The Ravagers exchanged looks that seemed almost like communication. Then, as a group, they turned and melted back into the jungle. Complete silence fell over the clearing. Professor Velk slowly approached the humans, his voice barely functional. "You negotiated with an apex predator." "Not really," Kira said, extinguishing the torch. "We just showed them that attacking us would be more trouble than it's worth. Predators are practical. They want easy meals with minimal risk. We made ourselves a difficult target." "But you didn't run," one of the alien students said, climbing down from their tree. "Every instinct says to run." Danny shook his head. "Running triggers chase instincts in pack hunters. If we'd run, they would have pursued. By standing our ground and making noise, we confused them. Confused predators are cautious predators." Commander Erix was reviewing footage from the encounter on his datapad. His expression was difficult to read, but his voice was thoughtful. "This wasn't an escape strategy. This was a defensive military operation." Amy laughed. "I guess survival and combat use similar principles. Assess the threat, use the terrain, work as a team, show strength. It's not about being stronger than the predator. It's about being too much trouble to mess with." The exercise was officially ended shortly after. The shuttle ride back to the academy was quiet as the alien students processed what they'd seen. The humans hadn't just survived the Ravagers. They'd coexisted with them for 4 hours in the Predator's own territory, without fleeing once. Professor Velk sat beside Jake during the return flight. "You said your species wasn't the apex predator of Earth." "We're not," Jake confirmed. "Then what are you?" Jake thought about it for a moment. "Survivors. We're really good at surviving. That's kind of our thing." The professor was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of realization. "I have been teaching survival wrong for 20 years. We all have." Kira overheard and turned around. "You've been teaching it correctly for your world and your species. Earth just required different lessons. Perhaps," Velk said slowly. "Or perhaps we stopped learning when we should have kept adapting." "Humans never stopped adapting, did they?" Jake looked out the window at the jungle passing below. "No, we really couldn't afford to." The passenger ship Starbound drifted through space on what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic mission. Jake stood in the observation deck watching the stars slip past when the alert siren started wailing. "All hands to stations. We have a distress signal from a disabled vessel. Captain Wright is altering course to investigate." Jake ran to the bridge, arriving just as Kira burst through the opposite door. They'd both been assigned to the Starbound as part of their advanced practicum, a chance to see real space operations. Neither had expected actual excitement. Captain Elena Wright stood at the center of the bridge, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression focused. Around her, crew members from a dozen species worked their stations. Ambassador Threll, the Zenthari diplomat leading the mission, stood beside her with his antennae twitching nervously. "Situation," Elena said crisply. The tactical officer, a being that looked like a floating cluster of crystals, responded. "Disabled transport vessel, the Wave Crest. Life signs detected, but ship is dead in space. Located in the Dead Reaches." Jake felt a chill. The Dead Reaches was a region known for being dangerous. Ships avoided it when possible. "We must follow protocol," Ambassador Threll said firmly. "Alert military vessels and maintain safe distance. The Dead Reaches are forbidden for civilian craft." "There are people alive on that ship," Elena replied. "We can't just leave them." "Captain, look at this." The sensor operator, a feline-like being named Nix, pulled up images of the wave crest. The hull was scarred with massive claw marks as if something enormous had raked across the metal. Jake stepped closer to the screen, his mind automatically analyzing the damage pattern. Those are attack marks. Something big, something with reach. Multiple strike points suggest it was testing the hull for weak spots. Everyone turned to look at him. How can you tell? Nix asked. The pattern. Random damage would be chaotic. This is methodical. Whatever attacked them was intelligent and looking for a way inside. Ambassador Threll's translator conveyed his distress clearly. This is a void-born attack pattern. They're extinct, they must be. The last confirmed sighting was 70 years ago. What's a void-born? Kira asked. The bridge went very quiet. Finally, the tactical officer spoke, their crystalline structure dimming. Space-adapted predators. They hunt ships. In galactic records, they're classified as unstoppable. The protocol is immediate withdrawal and military alert. Unstoppable? Jake repeated, exchanging a glance with Kira. They'd heard that word before, usually right before humans proved it wrong. Elena made her decision. We're not leaving survivors to die. Alan, assemble a rescue team. Nix, keep sensors at maximum. If anything approaches, I want to know immediately. Alan Price, the human security chief, was already moving. He was a broad-shouldered man who'd served in Earth's military before joining the academy. Jake, Kira, you're with me. We'll need extra hands. As they suited up in the docking bay, Alan handed them emergency equipment. Voidborn are supposedly huge creatures that evolved in deep space. They attack ships to get at the crew inside. Think of them as space sharks. How do you fight them? Kira asked, checking her suit's seals. According to galactic records, you don't. You run. Jake frowned. But we're not running. Alan smiled grimly. No, we're not. We're human. We don't accept unstoppable as an answer. The rescue team crossed to the wave crest in a small shuttle. The damage was worse up close. Great gouges in the hull, scratches that went deep into the metal. The airlock had been partially breached but was holding. They found 12 survivors huddled in an interior compartment, terrified and low on oxygen. As Alan organized the evacuation, Jake examined the hull damage from the inside. They were testing pressure points, he said to Kira. See how some scratches are deeper than others? They were learning where the hull was weakest. That's sophisticated hunting behavior, Kira replied. This isn't mindless aggression. They're problem solvers. A screeching alarm cut through their conversation. Nix's voice came through their communicators. Voidborn incoming. One creature has attached to the Starbound's hull. The rescue team rushed back to their ship. Through the viewport, Jake caught his first glimpse of a Voidborn. It was enormous, maybe 15 meters long, with a body that seemed to shift and change in the vacuum of space. Multiple limbs ending in blade-like claws gripped the Starbound's hull. Its head, if it could be called that, was pressing against a viewport as if looking inside. The bridge was in chaos when they arrived. Ambassador Threll was demanding immediate departure. Other crew members were frozen in fear. Captain Elena looked at Alan. Ideas? It's testing us like it tested the wave crest, Jake said before Alan could respond. It's curious but not committed to an attack yet. How do you know? Elena asked. Because we're still alive. If it wanted to breach the hull, it would have already. It's deciding if we're worth the effort. Alan moved to the weapons console. We have hull welders for repairs. They're essentially cutting torches. If we reverse their polarity, we can use them from the outside as deterrents. You want to hurt it? Nix asked, shocked. I want to annoy it, Alan corrected. Make it decide we're too much trouble. Working quickly, the human security team reconfigured the maintenance tools. When the Voidborn positioned itself over a critical junction, they activated the welders. Superheated plasma sprayed across the creature's hide. The Voidborn recoiled, releasing its grip. It floated in space near the ship, and Jake swore he could see it regarding them with what looked like intelligence. 3 more approaching, Nix reported, her voice tight with fear. Kira was already at another console. We can vent atmosphere from the docking bay. Not enough to hurt us, but it'll create a pressure wave. Might startle them. Do it, Elena ordered. The tactic worked. The burst of escaping air pushed 2 of the approaching Voidborn off course. The third one kept coming, but Alan was ready with another plasma discharge. For 20 minutes, the crew of the Starbound fought a defensive action. Every time a Voidborn tried to attach to the hull, they used plasma, pressure vents, or electrical charges from the sensor arrays. The humans coordinated the responses while the alien crew worked their stations with growing confidence. Finally, The Voidborn withdrew, floating away into the darkness of space. Ambassador Threll stared at the retreating creatures in disbelief. You fought them off. You actually fought off Voidborn. They're juveniles, Kira said, studying the sensor data. Look at the size variation and the tentative behavior. Adults would probably be much larger and more aggressive. These were young ones, testing and learning. So we basically scared off teenagers, Jake said with a tired laugh. Alan clapped him on the shoulder. Scared off space predators that have been called unstoppable for centuries. I'll take it. Elena began plotting a course out of the dead reaches. Alan, prepare a full report for the Academy. Include footage and sensor data. The galactic community needs to know that Voidborn can be deterred. As the Starbound jumped to faster-than-light speed, the rescued crew from the Wavecrest gathered on the bridge to thank their saviors. One of them, an elderly being from a species Jake didn't recognize, approached Captain Wright. Your crew fought where mine only knew to flee. Are all humans so brave? Elena considered the question. We're not brave. We're just experienced. On our world, you learn that predators are dangerous but not invincible. You learn that sometimes the best survival strategy is to stand your ground. Jake watched the stars streak past and thought about Professor Velk's class. Which kind of predator? The Voidborn were space-adapted pack hunters with problem-solving intelligence. On Earth, that would make them similar to orcas or maybe wolves. And humans had learned to coexist with both. Maybe that was humanity's real gift to the galaxy. Not fearlessness, but the simple knowledge that every predator, no matter how dangerous, had weaknesses. You just had to be smart enough to find them. The Grand Council chamber was packed. Representatives from 40 member species filled the curved rows of seats, all watching as Jake Morrison stood at the center podium beside Kira Wells. 6 months had passed since the Voidborn incident, and the galaxy had spent that time arguing about what it all meant. Professor Velk sat in the gallery, his antennae raised with pride. Beside him sat Dr. Peter Grant and Amy Foster, both brought back from Earth to help present the new protocols. Grand Council Representative Mira Quinn, the human diplomat, opened the session. We're here to vote on the proposed changes to galactic community survival training. Jake Morrison and Kira Wells will present the human framework. Jake took a breath, still not quite believing he was here. 6 months ago, he'd just been a student asking a simple question. Now he was addressing the entire Galactic Council. The current survival protocol is based on a single threat model, Jake began, his voice steady. 1 apex predator per ecosystem, 1 response strategy. For most worlds in the galactic community, this works because that's how your world's developed. Kira activated a holographic display showing dozens of different planets. But as we expand into new regions of space, we're finding that not all worlds followed the same evolutionary path. Some have multiple apex predators. Some have environmental hazards that change based on conditions. The universe is more dangerous and more varied than the current protocols account for. A council member from a species that resembled floating jellyfish pulsed with light. Are you saying our protocols are wrong? Not wrong, Jake said carefully. Incomplete. They work for what they were designed for, but they don't adapt to new situations. Amy Foster stood up in the gallery. May I demonstrate? At the council's approval, Amy came down to the floor. I'm going to describe a scenario, and I want you to tell me what the proper response is according to current protocols. You encounter an apex predator. What do you do? Freeze, assess, flee to elevated ground. Several council members responded in unison. Now what if the predator hunts by heat signature and elevated ground puts you against a cold stone surface that makes you stand out? Silence. What if the predator is an ambush hunter that's already positioned itself between you and the elevated ground? More silence. What if the predator is a pack hunter and climbing a tree just makes you a trapped target? A council member who resembled an armored turtle raised a claw. Then what do we do? It depends, Amy said simply. That's the point. You have to assess the specific threat and respond appropriately. One-size-fits-all protocols create a false sense of security. Dr. Peter Grant joined them. What we're proposing isn't a replacement for current protocols. It's an expansion. A tiered system that teaches adaptable thinking rather than rigid responses. Kira pulled up a flowchart. Step 1 is still assessment, but instead of assessing your escape route, you assess the threat type. Is it an ambush predator, a pack hunter, a pursuit predator? Each type has different weaknesses and different optimal responses. Jake continued. Step 2 is determining your assets. What tools do you have? What's the terrain? Are you alone or in a group? Your response changes based on these factors. Step 3 is choosing a strategy. Sometimes that's evasion. Sometimes it's deterrence. Sometimes it's standing your ground and making yourself a difficult target. A council member that looked like a large purple salamander spoke up. This sounds like combat training, not survival training. The principles overlap, Mira Quinn said from her position. But the goal is different. Combat training is about defeating a threat. Survival training is about living through an encounter. Sometimes the best way to survive is to fight back, even if you can't win, because fighting makes you too expensive a target. Professor Velk stood. I was skeptical of this approach. My species has followed the same protocols for millions of years. But after observing humans in action, I must admit our protocols have a critical flaw. They assume the prey species has no agency. We teach our people to be passive victims who can only run and hide. His words caused a stir in the chamber. Velk continued. Humans survived as a mid-level species on a deathworld not by being stronger or faster, but by being smarter and more adaptable. They used tools, cooperation, and intelligence to compensate for physical limitations. Perhaps we should learn from that. A council member stood, her feathers ruffling with agitation. But teaching aggression to prey species could be dangerous. What if it changes who we are? Jake shook his head. Humans aren't aggressive. We're defensive and adaptive. There's a difference. We don't seek out danger, but we don't accept that any threat is unstoppable. That mindset saved lives on the Starbound. Alan Price, who'd been sitting quietly in the gallery, stood up. I've trained security forces from 12 different species in the past 6 months. What I've found is that everyone already has these instincts buried somewhere. They've just been taught to suppress them. We're not creating something new. We're giving people permission to trust their own judgment. The council debated for hours. Some species argued that humans were an anomaly, and their methods wouldn't work for others. Some insisted the current protocols were sufficient. But slowly, through the presentation of evidence and testimony from survivors of the Voidborn attack, the tide began to turn. Finally, Mira Quinn called for a vote. The proposal is to make the Human Adaptable Framework available as an optional advanced training program, while maintaining current protocols as the standard. All in favor? The vote wasn't unanimous, but it passed. 32 species approved, 8 abstained or opposed. As the chamber emptied, Jake felt exhausted but satisfied. They hadn't changed everything overnight, but they'd opened a door. Kira found him sitting on the steps outside the council building. You okay? Just thinking, Jake said. 6 months ago I asked a simple question in class. Now we've changed galactic policy. You pointed out something obvious that everyone else had missed, Kira replied, sitting beside him. That's what humans do. We see things differently because we had to. Professor Velk approached them, his mandibles clicking, and what Jake had learned was the equivalent of a smile. You two should be proud. What you've started here will save lives. Professor, can I ask you something? Jake said. Do you really think other species can learn to think like humans? Velk was quiet for a moment. I think every species has the capacity for adaptation. Humans simply never had the luxury of forgetting how to do it. Perhaps the greatest gift your species brings to the galaxy is not your survival skills, but the reminder that survival requires constant learning and growth. Amy and Dr. Peter joined them, and the group headed toward the transport station. As they walked, Jake overheard a group of alien students talking excitedly about the new training programs. One of them, Tarn, the deer-like student from Professor Velk's original class, was explaining something to his friends. The first question isn't how do I escape, it's which kind of threat am I facing? That's what makes all the difference, Jake smiled. The message was spreading. On the transport back to the academy, Kira pulled up her datapad. The first advanced training course starts next month. They're calling it Adaptive Survival Protocols. Guess who they want to teach it? Please say someone with actual teaching experience, Jake groaned. You, me, Amy, and Alan. We're apparently the dream team. Jake laughed, but the sound was warm. You know what the funny thing is? We're not even the toughest species from Earth, not even close. We're just the ones who learned to survive alongside the tough ones. That's probably for the best, Kira said. Can you imagine if it had been polar bears that developed space travel? Or saltwater crocodiles? Or orcas, Jake added with a shudder. The galaxy should be grateful it got humans. Professor Velk, who'd overheard the conversation, made a thoughtful clicking sound. Perhaps that is the real lesson. Humans are not survivors because you are strong, but because you are adaptable, and adaptation is something any species can learn, if they're willing. As the transport lifted off, Jake looked out at the academy growing smaller below them. Somewhere down there in a classroom not unlike the one where this had all started, future students would learn a new way of thinking about survival. They would learn that there was no single answer to danger. They would learn to assess, adapt, and respond, and when faced with an apex predator, they would know to ask the most important question: which kind?